Hello, 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 hello. Hello, 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 hello.
Sure.
Oh, I hear you now.
Can you both just talk at the same time?
Test,
Andrew,
test, hello.
Andrew,
Glad to be here on a
Andrew.
Friday.
What?
Government's going to shut down tomorrow.
everybody hear me? Hey, if you're just coming in, the workshop will benefit you the most if you sit with people at a table. So go ahead and find a table that has some folks at it, or form a table, invite others, but sitting with people at your rounds will benefit you the most out of this workshop.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't have to tilt down. You just talk.
No, I know. I just couldn't tell. All right. Good morning, everyone. If folks who are filtering in can kind of sit on this side of the room, that would be great. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I know there's a lot of really great sessions. It's also a Friday on the last day of the conference, so I'm sure everybody's a little tired after all the festivities, but we appreciate you being here this morning. My name is Faith Overall, and I am the Community Engagement Manager at Leave No Trace. I'm sure I've had the pleasure of meeting some of you before. But for those of you who are not familiar with me, hadn't had the chance to talk to you yet, I have been with Leave No Trace for 8.5 years now. And currently, I have the pleasure of working with many of our destination partners, including the Colorado Tourism Office and the Care for Colorado Coalition. That is now over 130 or something like that, Barb, yes? Almost to 150, woo! So if you're not part of the Care for Colorado Coalition, we encourage you to join. I also get to work with some other partners like Visit North Carolina, Brand Montana, Visit Laguna Beach, and some other smaller destinations across the U.S. Today, my colleague Andrew Leary is going to be presenting with me, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. My name's Andrew Leary. I'm the Director of Sustainable Tourism and Partnerships at Leave No Trace. I've worked in the travel and tourism industry since 2005, and adjacent to Leave No Trace, I work as a ski guide as well. And what I think is so amazing about this community of people is that you all have a tremendous power to bring stewardship education and practices that make a difference to help protect your communities, whether it's visiting on Main Street or adjacent parks or really anything within our community. So thank you for being a part of the Care for Colorado Leave No Trace Coalition and all the work that you get to do. It's super inspiring to our team as a small nonprofit that has existed nationally for almost 30 years, that travel and tourism sees the value in stewardship education and messaging for all visitors who are coming to our destinations, and in parentheses, our residents as well. So, Faith?
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, so the goal of our session today is really to talk about goals. And we know that Colorado is very, very committed to stewardship. There are so many folks here in the state who are actively promoting responsible recreation and who are sharing the Care for Colorado and Leave No Trace messaging and really doing their best to educate visitors around these important practices and how visitors can be a real power in protecting our outdoor areas that are probably the reason a lot of you live here and that you do the job that you do. So through this workshop today, what we would really like to do is help you all set up goals around your Care for Colorado and Leave No Trace efforts and really make sure that those goals that you're setting are achievable, they're measurable, and that you have some really good and meaningful metrics to go with them. So we want to kick things off by kind of getting you all in the frame of mind for this conversation today and want to know or hear from you all, why does your organization set goals in the first place? It doesn't have to be why do they set stewardship goals, but why do they set goals in the first place? And if somebody wants to raise their hand and then join us at this mic to share, that would be great. Oh, Barb, it's better to leave the mic. Did you hear? Oh. Just making sure she's not running away with it. Come on, somebody share. Why do you set goals? The people I know are going to end up doing all the sharing if you... Focus, yeah, to focus the organization as a whole. Absolutely. Sorry, say that again?
To prove that it's worth it.
Yeah. Return on investment, yeah, absolutely. Any other reasons you set goals? Absolutely, yep. All of these really fit together, right? Giving you that vision, building a strategy around it, and then being able to show to your organization or even to your partners or a board you might report to, really what is that return on investment? So we're gonna help kind of walk you all through the process of what that can look like for Care for Colorado and Leave No Trace, which can sometimes be a little bit difficult, I think, for us to think about what are those meaningful metrics and what are the things just besides, X number of people saw the Leave No Trace principles in our visitor guide. So Andrew's going to take you through the first part of that.
Let me ask you a question. Raise your hand if goals are valuable to your organization. Keep your hand up if creating goals is difficult sometimes. Yes, it can be extremely difficult because while every organization, beyond this room included, thinks goals are important, that doesn't necessarily mean we are all equipped to write goals in a way that help us out down the line. So what we're focusing on today and some level setting are measurable goals. And there's a difference between just having, here's our goal, and here's having a measurable goal. To me, if I'm goal setting, I want to be able to do something with it later on. It needs to tell me something. It needs to help storytell. It needs to relate to ROI or my key performance indicators that I have. And it needs to help me evaluate, was I successful with achieving X? So here's a statement on here. It says, install new Care for Colorado Leave No Trace trailhead signs at all 30 of our local trailheads. Does this sound like a goal? It does sound like a goal. There are a lot of organizations that strategic planning and other things that we do. This might be a goal that we set forth. The problem with goal setting is that we didn't all go through the basics of how to set goals. So this sounds like a goal, but this is actually a tactic. This is something that once we do it, we check a box, we say it's done. We measure the output because we have 30 signs at our local trailheads. But there's some important information that gets left out of here as it relates to the storytelling and things that go beyond. So here's another statement that I'll read out loud, and then I want your opinions about the two. New Care for Colorado Leave No Trace signs at all 30 of our local trailheads result in users putting trash in available receptacles. What's the difference between the first statement and this statement? It gives the why. What else? It's very specific. Anything else that you notice? Yes, exactly. So all these things are really important because those are all the ingredients that go into measurable goals. So we still have the what, the new Care for Colorado signage. We still have the output, the 30 trailheads. Those are important things. But going beyond and having the why and knowing where we want to lead, that's something that helps us out. Because when we set goals today, we often reevaluate them 12 months from now or whatever your time frame might be. But our brains aren't thinking, oh, yesterday we did this. It's hard to track back. Why did we set that goal 12 months ago? What is this really telling us? And then we get into this kind of doom cycle of resetting the same goals and looking at things. So this statement, results in users putting trash in available receptacles, is our desired outcome from putting signs out in the first place. Now, there may be other desired outcomes. Maybe it's having people stick to trails. Maybe it's keeping pets on leash. Maybe it could be anything related to Care for Colorado, Leave No Trace. This is just a specific example for trash. And what you all have at the local level and your destination level is that you can be specific and you can be focused if you choose to. There's another thing that this tells us, which is important for measurable goals when we're setting them and when we've decided that these are them. And that is, it gives us measurables that we should look at. So we can have the why cooked into our goals because we want to elicit behavior change. But how do we know that behavior is changing? What are we going to evaluate? What do we seek to study? What do we seek to know? Social media impressions aren't necessarily telling us is behavior changing, but understanding our users putting trash into receptacles is something that tells us, did this work? Is it working? Is it not working? So the anatomy of a measurable goal includes three basic things. The key what, so the thing that we're using or would like to deploy, the result that we would like to see, and that can be broad, but if it's specific, it's even better. And then teasing out what is the measurable that's going to help us evaluate this. Because again, in 12 months' time, if I look at this goal and I'm not thinking about what the measurable is, I'm going to go in 12 months and be like, well, how do we know we were successful? And, well, we didn't really measure this when we could have right from the gate, right out of the gate, and we could have worked with land managers right away, but now we're 12 months and here we are. So a measurable goal, these three components really equip you right out of the gate so that you don't have headaches later on in thinking about why do we set this goal, how are we measuring it, what story is it telling? There are some tips that I want to share for developing goals in general based on that anatomy. So when you're thinking about Care for Colorado, Leave No Trace goals, think with the long term in mind first and then work backwards. What's the change you want to see in 3 to 5 years in your destination? Improved outdoor spaces, greater resident sentiment toward visitors being stewards in the outdoors, residents themselves being stewards in the outdoors. Setting those 3 to 5 year goals and then working backwards for your 12-month short-term goals is a great way to have the trail map right in front of you, see exactly the peak that you're going to end up at, and building the trail backwards so you know exactly how you're going to get there or how you would like to get there. How many of you have set goals or metrics or things and you use the words reduce, improve, grow, or increase? Anybody? A lot of us do it. We want to increase visitor pro-stewardship behavior. We want to decrease impacts in the outdoors. If you're going to use those in your goals, which you should, make sure you have baseline data because this is meaning that there's a change over time that's taking place. If you don't have baseline data for something, say it's evaluating visitors' sense of stewardship. If you don't know what people think of their own stewardship right now, saying we want to increase it, well, what do you want to increase it to? And then when you're working with your staff, then when you're reporting this back out to your board or other people, it's difficult to say because you didn't have that baseline data in the first place. So if you desire to reduce, improve, grow, increase, or any of those growth, decrease type things, think about, do we have baseline data to support this? And if we don't, maybe we need to gather it first, or Maybe we need to work with our peers and people within our orbit to say, is there a way that we can collect data and ask questions in a way that says, did this increase your affinity for X, Y, and Z? And certainly in the world of research and academia, which is where I come from, there are most certainly ways to do that with visitor sentiment and resident sentiment surveys. There are a whole lot of tools out there. But just be aware of when we use these words because it means very specific things in what we have or don't have. We looked at it with the anatomy of a goal. You have the opportunity to start writing down what are the things we're going to measure to know if we're succeeding, and how are we going to measure those. So once you finalize your goals as you're developing it, have a separate notebook or a separate window open on your computer and start taking notes about, we are going to measure this goal in this way. And then finally, related to developing goals, which inevitably lead to metrics and how do we know what we're doing and who do we have to tell our story to, if we're going beyond just impressions, you may have to start retraining your board or your city council or whoever it is that you're reporting things to. You may have to retrain them that impression numbers and 9 bajillion people seeing our billboard isn't the only mark of success. A lot of people at those levels who we report to say, well, if it's not a number in the millions, or if it decreased by millions, those are red flags, when in fact they aren't necessarily red flags. Those boards and folks, we've all just been trained to know the bigger the number, the better the outcome and the more success, but it doesn't always tell the full story. So as you're thinking about what these goals are that go beyond just impression numbers and those output metrics, which those are important still, think about who you're going to have to tell this story to, because they may not be used to these new things that you're thinking about and the ways that we're encouraging you to think today. So we can have our goals, they can be measurable, they can fit that 3-part sequence that I mentioned, but then we get into metrics and evaluation. And metrics and evaluation are, of course, important because what's our return on our investment? How do we know this is succeeding or not? What is the sentiment that visitors and residents and other people have toward our efforts in travel and tourism, not just specific to stewardship? Putting the title of the presentation into the slide feels a lot like a Michael Bay film, like The Rock, Con Air, things like that. But it's important to go beyond just having impressions. It's a currency that works in the travel and tourism industry and is important. Marketing, knowing how many people we're reaching, how many people are engaging with us through retargeting or our 3-second video watches or whatever it might be. Those things are important, but we have to go beyond them. So it doesn't tell stewardship success efforts alone. Because again, the billboard scenario, if 9 billion people see my billboard on I-25, that's great, and that might be one success, but if my billboard is encouraging them to reduce trash on public lands in my community, I have no idea what they did behavior-wise after seeing that billboard. So how can we as an industry go beyond just impression metrics? There are ways that we can go beyond it, but there's a mindset that goes into it as well. The models that you see here are actually based on sustainable tourism mindset models, but we've adapted it for metric measures of success. So take a look at what's on the left first, which is the Venn diagram, where our measures of success can come from nature, can come from our economies, can come from residents, visitors, and stakeholders. Those are all really important places beyond just how many people saw it. The problem with the Venn diagram way of thinking is it's much like a budget that we have, is that things can be pulled out. So if a metric is not easy for us to get, like did something take place, is change happening in nature because of my efforts, for instance, we might put that one on the shelf and not come back to it and instead focus on what was how many heads and beds did we have because of this campaign, what did our visitors think about this? So if we have this Venn diagram thing, it's like Velcroing ideas to ourselves. If something's not working, we're probably going to take it off and focus on other things and really celebrate those things that are working. Instead, mindset-wise, don't think of it like a Venn diagram. Think of it like one of those nesting dolls, one of the Russian nesting dolls where there are things inside other things. So this container that we have on the right, if our goal for Care for Colorado, Leave No Trace, is to ultimately increase the health of our natural ecosystems and increase people's stewardship as it relates to land, water, cultural heritage, wildlife, and all these important things here in Colorado and beyond, we really need to center everything within nature. And then we can go further to say, well, the next tier down is visitors, residents, our stakeholders. And the next tier down can be our economy, and the next tier down can be our organization. So mindset matters because it's very easy for us, especially these days coming out of the pandemic, to prioritize things and take off those Velcro balls or change the Venn diagram because we don't have the time or resource, or it's simply not working with the pathway that we're choosing to take. We have a couple partners beyond Colorado, and I wanted to share some of their success stories, who have taken this mindset into consideration, where the natural ecosystems that are a part of their destination, their stakeholders, visitors, residents, their economies, all play into what metrics look like. The first one is Sonoma County Tourism in just north of the Bay Area in California. Sonoma County Tourism, when they started working with Leave No Trace, they immediately brought in their regional parks group, like from the outset. They're equal partners with Leave No Trace and Sonoma County Tourism and what they do to promote Leave No Trace in those areas. They're a very small county, but they have a coalition, a growing coalition that's about a year and a half old now, of 55 stakeholder businesses, from hospitality to retail to a whole lot of people who touch the visitor economy, playing a role in their coalition. So the power that they have here to set goals and gain metrics is that they can set goals and bring their parks partners into this to say, here's what we desire to see change. What is it that you parks partners desire to see change? How can we exchange the metrics that we currently study or the potential to study so we're not operating in vacuums? And then how can these 55 coalition partners also help tell the story as well? So certainly coalition partner sentiment can be really important. What do people think? Do they practice it themselves? Is it making a difference in the community? But also, what are the ways that you are reaching visitors with this? Are you reaching them just through digital? Are you reaching them at the cash wrap? Are you reaching them when the server visits their table? Are you referencing table tent cards that are on people's tables when they're thinking about what they're going to order or while they're there? So there are all these different things that we can align to say these are metrics of success that are working. And because the Parks Group is involved with this, there are some really interesting studies and things that are going to go on around data collecting to say how much trash is accumulating in the trash cans that we are paying a waste management service to haul out. If we're encouraging people to use available restrooms, how much servicing do those restrooms now need because we are using this messaging that says use this rather than doing this? So working with your local land managers, you'll hear Faith and I say this a lot, is crucial to metrics and goal setting that make a difference when it comes to Care for Colorado and Leave No Trace. Another partner case study comes from Martin County, Florida, which is on the Gulf side. They took a very specific route and took Leave No Trace and put it into a new tourism product that they made available for all visitors who come to them. And it's this eco tour, Leave No Trace. Let's get people out into the outdoors, but we're going to interpret as we go. It's a guided experience. People sign up for it, people pay for it. So super successful. Martin County was actually awarded the Destination Stewardship Award, Mercury Award at ESTO for this year. They've been able, because it's a program where people are signing up for it and people are engaging with it, they can interact with those visitors or those customers to say, what were your perceptions of X, Y, and Z? And can you give us feedback about this? So far they've been asking, were you satisfied with it? Would you come back for another program? Like those kind of things that are important from like an ROI. Is this program, can it live on our shelf of offerings? But where they're going further is to reach back out to people and say, you went through this program with us. Do you believe, I'm not going to phrase it exactly the way that their evaluation survey phrased it, but in a non-leading way, do you believe that this experience increased your affinity for the natural area in Martin County? Something like that. When they're incorporating that, then they can start making these correlations to say, here's an intentional product that we created, an experience that people are signing up for, that we know is popular, that we know is driving traffic back to us, and we're reaching our desired results to increase people's awareness and desire to change behaviors so that they are connected to the natural world or protecting the natural world or being stewards of the natural world. So these are just some examples of what your peers from California to Florida, and there are many in between, and there's many here in Colorado, are doing around these metrics and goal setting and why they make a difference and how they're going beyond just the how many views on Instagram, how many 3-second views on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. Again, those are important, but not the full story. This picture tells us a lot. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a picture like this before. I think an overflowing trash can tells us a lot, but I'm curious if you all think that a picture of an overflowing trash can, what does that tell you? The message is working? Need more trash cans? Anybody else? It's a popular place? You all should give yourselves a big round of applause for a lot of reasons. Friday, after the awards ceremony, workshop. But the reasons that were just stated are not what most people think of when they see this photo. Because this came up during the pandemic. This has come up for places that get lots of visitation over and over again. When people see this, they say, that's over-tourism, that's a problem, that's too many people here. If you ask residents, they see this and they're like, that is not the outdoor experience I want to have. But Chris, to your point, that it's working, if Care for Colorado says, use available trash cans when you're in the outdoors, this is what we should expect to see. This is not trash that's just strewn about and like the trash can blew over. This, I'll describe it if you can't see the image, but it's several plastic bags that are knotted off or tied off with trash within it. So people are trying to contain it. They're trying to pile it on top of a receptacle. Maybe they fell, it looks like maybe they were placed right next to it. We sometimes see this with pet waste as well. This is people trying to do the right thing. This is an indicator that messaging is working. This is an indicator that our efforts are working. Now, it opens the door to more more opportunities for us as travel and tourism professionals to say, how could we help support our land managers to have a larger receptacle or something that's emptied more frequently? The same thing goes for restrooms. If we're encouraging people to use available restrooms, then they're probably going to need to be serviced more often. Most people do not want to use a restroom. Most people would be uncomfortable using a restroom at a trailhead, generally speaking. And if it's not pristine, clean, perceptions of that, they're not going to use that. And that's why a lot of times we see human waste like around the restroom, but not within the restroom because it hasn't been serviced. So people are not bringing hundreds times more trash into the outdoors than they were 3 years ago. Human waste is pretty consistent. We all produce the same amount of solid and liquid waste, generally speaking, each day. So if those variables are constant, we're okay with that, then how can we improve infrastructure? How can we further support our messaging? How can we further support our land managers? Because we ask land managers to do a whole lot, and it can't just be on them to do it by themselves. And there's some great examples here in Colorado, one that comes to mind from Chaffee County in particular about those travel and tourism professionals equipping trailheads with restrooms that did not exist and servicing those restrooms as well. So we want to be very narrow and specific, and Faith is going to guide you through this next part. When it comes to Leave No Trace and going beyond impression metrics, there are things that really work well. There are things we have opportunities for. And so Faith's going to guide you through all the 7 principles of Care for Colorado and give you some ideas of what those metrics look like.
Awesome. So before we kind of go through these, I'd love for some folks to share some of the impacts that you're seeing to help kind of frame what are those metrics and what are those goals that you might be interested in collecting. So just feel free to shout them out, some of those recreation-related impacts. Overcrowding, yep.
Yeah, we were on Guanella Pass like 2 years ago, and it was the amount of cars that were just like pulled over on the side of, like didn't even think about where they were pulling over. It was ridiculous.
Yep.
It was sad. Mm-hmm. And we were like, okay, just keep driving.
Yeah, so with Guanella Pass, that we actually have some really good images from Guanella Pass because we did some events at Guanella Pass, more specifically around Beardstadt. And what comes along with that overcrowding and those parking issues, damage to vegetation, safety issues. If emergency services need to get up the mountain, it's going to be harder with all of those cars there. So yeah, some definite impacts that come along with that and those outer overcrowding issues. Anyone else want to share some of the things there? Overcrowding isn't the only thing happening in Colorado.
Inadequate staffing to manage these types of impacts.
Yep, for sure.
We're supposed to be creating jobs, but we're not.
Yeah, the land management agencies are pretty consistently understaffed, so that hurts education efforts in areas, it hurts their ability to be out on the trail and managing things like parking or, checking in on visitors and making sure they're following some of those regulations that help or that align directly with Leave No Trace. So we're going to share some examples with you all as far as metrics that you can be thinking about in your communities. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but hopefully these will kind of serve as inspiration for you. Know before you go, we always say at Leave No Trace that this is the most important principle. If you've ever come to one of our sessions before, you've probably heard me say it. If you don't practice know before you go, if you don't plan ahead and prepare, practicing those other principles are going to be a lot harder. But how do we actually measure that? So a lot of us have the issue of overcrowding, and overcrowding in very specific areas. If you're in Boulder, Chautauqua, it's going to be the place where it feels a little bit like you're at Disneyland sometime. So how do we measure that our message around overcrowding, or one more specifically that says, hey, check out these other destinations, is working? Of course, trail counts. Many land managers have trail counters out there, and if you can set one up at a trail that you're actually pushing people to, and you see that use go up, you could correlate that with the fact that this message is working. People are going to this other destination that we might be suggesting. Sticking to trails, this is a big one. A lot of what we call undesignated trails or user-created trails. They may be trails that have been created from people going out to a viewpoint, from people shortcutting a trail. In some areas, there may be trails coming out from neighborhoods that are not designated trails. So how do we see if our message around undesignated trails is working? This is a kind of tricky one because a lot of people don't know which trail is their correct trail, like which trail was made, which one is the one that I'm supposed to be walking on. So if we're pushing out a message to stick to designated trails, we really can look towards our land managers. When I first started at Leave No Trace, I actually worked in research and did some research with Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks, and we were looking at undesignated trails. And they had trail counts, so they knew that at the time there were 150 miles of designated trails in Boulder, and there were 150 additional miles of undesignated trails. So using that information, and we're not necessarily going to see the number of undesignated trails go down. Like I said, there's a lot of management that goes into restoring undesignated trails or user-created trails, and a lot of that is going to take a really long time to revegetate, so we might not necessarily see it go down, but we'll notice that that's not going up if that message is working. For Trash the Trash, whose community has an issue with pet waste and picking up pet waste? Oh, I'm honestly surprised it wasn't more hands. So this is a big one, of course, and it's one that tends to get people pretty fired up if you talk to them about it. But it's one that a lot of destinations are really messaging towards is one, for you to pick up that pet waste, and then two, for you to pack it out. So let's say we do a big social campaign around pet waste, really asking people to use the bag dispensers that are found at a bunch of trailheads in our community. We've had a great opportunity to use some funding to put them out at all the popular trailheads. How often are those bags being replaced? How often are people taking those and picking up after their pets? Now, of course, there's a lot of other factors that go into all of these measurements, But that can be a great baseline for understanding that our message is working, even if it's the sign on the pet waste dispenser at the trailhead. People are reading that, they're understanding why they should pick up after their pets, and they're therefore taking those bags. Leave it as you find it. We capture a lot within this principle, but one thing that we can definitely look at, and that causes a lot of issues here in Colorado and across the country, are invasive species. Aquatic invasive species, the quagga mussel is one that's here in Colorado, and that we're trying to prevent from moving into other bodies of water. And many areas or lakes or waterways in Colorado will require that you get your boat checked before putting it into their waterway. Some of those areas, you don't have to necessarily drive through a gate to get there. You're not forced to have your boat checked, but there's one somewhere nearby. So if you're directing people to those areas nearby, let's say your visitor center volunteers are handing out rat cards about invasive species and telling people to go to those boat checks if they're talking to them about water. If the number of boat checks is going up, hopefully that message is getting across to people that we don't want to be spreading these and that those boat checks are doing a lot of good.
Metric that goes along with that, which is, you could say, are boat checks going up, but you could also ask the questions, are citations for people not getting boat checks going down? So it doesn't just have to be one thing, and often with all these metrics, it's triangulating a lot because there's not the silver bullet, one metric that tells the entire story.
For pet waste, if you're part of the Care for Colorado Coalition, we did a pet waste pickup. In April, as part of Earth Day, we're always trying to give back on top of everything that we're doing to get the messaging out. If that area had measured, every month we pick up pet waste and measure how much pet waste in pounds or whatever our volunteers are picking up. If that's starting to go down, that could be another really great measure of whether this messaging is working. Be careful with fire, obviously a huge priority here for us in Colorado. Wildfires have had really damaging effects here in Colorado and across the West. And this is sort of a tricky one in my head because we're not necessarily going to be measuring the frequency of wildfires. Ideally, your destination doesn't have enough wildfires for you to say the number of wildfires is going down. We were having 3 a year, now we're having none a year. That's probably not the case. Also, knowing whether or not a fire is caused by humans or by lightning or whatever it may be caused by can take years. It takes years for us to find out how some of those large fires were started. So campfires have a lot more impacts than just wildfires. And of course, wildfires is very important with that safety, but we can look at a lot of other things as well. And land managers are pretty consistently trying to measure these things. I volunteer for the Indian Peaks Wilderness Alliance just outside of Boulder, up by Nederland, Colorado. Beautiful area, but campfires are not allowed on the east side of Indian Peaks. Our volunteers, when we go out, if we see people actively having a fire where they're not supposed to, we will share that information with land managers. If we find fire pits, you can actually tell based on the ash color how long ago there was a fire in there. We'll take that information back to the land manager. We'll take information about smoldering fires, and a lot of land managers or their volunteer groups will capture the same information. So if we're finding less fires, even if it's an area where it's allowed, if the land managers, the rangers are finding less smoldering fires, which tend to be a big cause of wildfires, if they're finding less of those unattended fires, then we know that message is working about completely dousing your fire, knowing how much water you need to have to get that done. Keep wildlife wild. Bears are a big issue here in Colorado. I think the stat I found was that there were actually about 93 bears euthanized in 2022. A lot of that is caused from issues with humans, whether it be in front country camping areas or in communities. And in some areas in the backcountry, you are required to carry a bear canister. And even if you're not required, as somebody who occasionally backpacks, They can be a lot more effective in that you're not trying to hang it off the ground on alpine trees that don't really give you the ability to do that. So lots of communities have rentals for bear canisters, even things like REI, different land manager offices, national forests will often have bear cans that you can rent. NGOs who are really involved with this will have bear canisters you can rent. So if you're, say, marketing for the Maroon Bells in that wilderness area, and you notice that all your local outfitters are telling you that there's so many more people coming in and taking those bear canisters and renting them out, you can correlate that with the fact that you've been encouraging people, hey, if you're gonna go to Conundrum Hot Springs, you're required to carry a bear canister. You can rent one in these 3 places. And finally, share our parks and trails. This is something that's a little hard to measure, but is something that you can do through visitor and resident sentiment surveys. You can really get in and assess what was somebody's experience on the trail. Did they feel like bikers were yielding to them as a hiker? Did they notice people communicating with equestrians and stepping off the side of the trail when they came by? What was the overall feeling? Did I feel welcomed when I was on the trail doing the activity that I was doing? Now, again, there's some nuance to this. Somebody might have a bad experience with one person, and they're really gonna let that show through that sentiment survey. Also, if you were to ask people, oh, did you yield to hikers coming uphill? Our old boss always used to say, if you ask people if they've been speeding, they're gonna tell you, no, I never speed. Everybody should speed a little, in my opinion. So you're probably not getting perfect data, but you're getting a lot of that general sentiment from your community. So using those visitor and resident sentiment surveys that you're probably already doing to really get at some of those leave no trace practices that you're trying to encourage can really apply to, I would say, any of these principles. And is something that Leave No Trace does a lot in the work that we do with research, as well as the work that a lot of our partners do. Everything that we do is really backed by science, and so is our messaging. And so we have those questions that we can help provide.
One thing that I'll just share as a reminder for all of us about visitor and resident sentiment. It's easy to come up with questions, but it's easy to come up with questions. It's even easier to deploy a question that's actually a leading question and not something that's objective and asking their true opinion. So there's a big study of science behind that and things. So for all the research resources that you use, make sure that you're not using leading questions. And then 2, be careful about when you use terms like sustainable and overcrowding. Anything like that. You may need to give some definition to what that is. For instance, somebody who comes for us, this doesn't feel like overcrowding. For someone who comes from a very rural part of the United States, this amount of people might feel like overcrowding. For somebody who rides the New York City subway system every single day, but goes to Guanella Pass in the fall and sees all these people out there, that's not gonna feel like overcrowding. And there's data actually from land managers in New Hampshire who studied this with visitors in the Northeast, where land managers perceived overcrowding as this issue, it's this big thing. But visitors who were coming from metro areas in Boston and New York did not perceive overcrowding at all, because that's what their reality is. So just be careful for like those buzz terms, and even in national sustainability surveys that we see from Booking, Expedia, et cetera, they're getting better, but they originally asked just about the word sustainable, and they didn't ask what it means, and they don't go into that deeper dive. So you have the opportunity to do that, and just a reminder for all of us around those sentiment surveys.
All right, so now we're gonna, throw things back on you all, and we'd love for you to have some discussions at your rounds about what are your Care for Colorado Leave No Trace goals. Maybe you already had some set, have those changed? Really, what is it that you're looking at, and what are some of those metrics that you're trying to measure? And we'll give you 3 to 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll ask some folks to share back. We're going to bring it back together because we have just a couple minutes left. And I know there's some exciting things happening in this ballroom after this, some prizes and things like that. So if you would actually go to the mic, it would be great because we are recording, and folks who watch this recording would love to see you ask your questions, / be able to hear you with the mic. So does anybody want to come up, or will somebody come up and share what their table discussed? Right there.
Yeah, we talked about a few things. I think one of the things that I've seen as a good takeaway from this is that we do have some different entities that do have some of these metrics, but I don't know that we've necessarily set the goals with those in mind always.
Yeah.
And so we maybe do have some of that baseline data, but it hasn't really been in the context of setting the goal. And so I think that's a good takeaway for me, is to use those baseline things, and then depending on what our needs are, then we can use those as we're doing our goal setting. So I think just connecting those two things is a good thing.
Yeah, I think that this conversation also opens up this wonderful opportunity for collaboration in your communities, like you're saying, to work with some of those groups that may already have some of this baseline data. And I think, land managers, nonprofits and things, if you come to them wanting to work with them and get some of that data, they're going to be excited that you're supporting their mission and getting this message out and really trying to do so in a meaningful way. Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else?
We were just talking about the fact that there has to be an example set by the residents who live in a place. And so if they're not doing the right thing, it's harder to tell a visitor to do the right thing, because we were talking about parking in North Cherry Creek. Like, just small things like, if you're not riding the bus or taking ride sharing, how do you expect anyone else to do it? And I live in a neighborhood in Loveland where the dog poop issue was real. And then they put up little signs that said you were being watched, which helped, but it didn't really help until they actually put the bag dispenser and the garbage cans there, and that helped immensely. So sometimes it's just right in front of your face, something, and you're like, oh, aha. So
Absolutely.
buy in.
And I will say, we are at Leave No Trace, we say the you're being watched, it's okay. That might work for some people, but again, we really try and lead with that education too, of just saying like, hey, this is why, because a lot of people are like, oh shoot, I didn't know I was polluting my water like in the backyard, rough, Lauren?
So Holly and I were talking about using popular trails for learning opportunities and having that signage where a lot of visitors are going. I'm in Boulder, she's in Breckenridge, both like huge tourist destinations within the state. And there are centers like the Troll that's in Breckenridge, or really any of the beginning trails in Chautauqua, where you can put like just little signage to remind people and like teach them, because I think a lot of people get overwhelmed with like the big sign at the front of the trail that has a lot of words on it and they might not read it all. But if you're like breaking that up and creating like a more of an interactive like learning trail, that might be a good opportunity. And then if you have that space, you can count with a trail counter how many people are using that.
Absolutely, yeah. And the Care for Colorado, we have made, or the CTO has made, individual signs for each principal. And I always encourage people, it's not every principal every time. Focus in on that one message. So if that area has a really big problem with invasive species, use that message right there for folks, because they're not going to absorb that whole trailhead sign with the map and all the symbols and all the principles and the words and blah, really focus in on what it is people need to know in that one space. So thank you. So we have just another minute, but to leave room for questions, I'm just going to leave you all with this. So as you're moving forward, hopefully this session has inspired you to kind of work on setting some of those measurable goals around Care for Colorado, Leave No Trace, as well as some kind of metrics you can be using to measure that success. But what are the opportunities and the challenges that you're going to have in evaluating those goals? I think we talked about a little bit of that here today, just as far as, some of these aren't perfect. But just keep that in mind as you move forward. So with the last minute we have, are there any questions or any final thoughts folks would like to share? Do you want to?
Pretty loud, but I was just going to say that, as DMOs, we are the communicators. So our job is to message out and hope that everybody listens and gets the message. And if we don't connect with the land managers, if we don't connect with the town rec department, we can't actually achieve the goal. So we can set metrics, but if we're not collaborating or partnering, then we won't be able to achieve that. We're just messaging and hoping for the best.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's a wonderful takeaway. Waylon?
Yeah, I was going to say too, we talk about online or signs. I think a big important piece that's missed is that physical in touch. And yes, we're used to sitting in front of our computers or whatever, but getting us as DMO representatives out at these trailheads or out at a place or out tabling, and really going beyond just being communicators, but by communicating through action, not just our words. So getting out, and a couple weeks ago, I got out and worked from 9:30 p.m. to 11, taking night sky quality readings while I'm building this program to be that initial example. So let's get our hands dirty when we're looking at these sustainability initiatives, because if we haven't taken the time to see what it takes to get these metrics, going and taking a car camp or going with our organizations to count fire rings, how do we know how easy it is to collect those metrics?
Absolutely. And those visitor centers and those restaurants and those breweries and the people that you have who do have that opportunity too for that face-to-face interaction, they are going to continue to be a big part of this because they are able to have a conversation, even if it's a 2-minute conversation with somebody about Leave No Trace, and that, like Waylon had said, getting out there, communicating with people, being at trailheads, being in a brewery, saying, oh, you're headed to this trail, please practice Leave No Trace while you're there, is going to make a huge difference. So, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. We're all set.